The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon. First of all, let me apologize to our very distinguished witnesses and to all of you. We had 8 votes in succession, and they began exactly at 2 o'clock, so I apologize for that. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon for this second hearing in our series focusing on the deeply disturbing and seemingly intractable problem of international child abduction, which occurs when one parent unlawfully moves a child from his or her country of residence, often for the purpose of denying the other parent access to the child. I believe it to be a major global human rights abuse, a form of child abuse that seriously harms children while inflicting excruciating emotional pain and suffering on left-behind parents and families. On May 24th, at the first hearing in this series, this committee heard from 6 left-behind parents, 1 success story and 5 stories of deep and continuing agony and separation. Michael Elias, a combat-injured Iraq veteran from New Jersey, told our subcommittee of his anguish after his ex-wife, Mayuma Nakamura, used her Japanese consulate connections to abduct little Jade and Michael Jr. after the New Jersey court had ordered surrender of passports and joint custody. Ms. Nakamura flagrantly disregarded those valid court orders, telling Michael Elias, quote, "My country, Japan, will protect me." And of course she was right. Although Japan is reportedly prosecuting her for abusing her consulate connections, they will not return the children. Michael Elias told us that, quote, "As a father who no longer has his children to hold in his arms, I cannot deal with this sorrow, so I try my best to stay strong and keep fighting for their return. All my hopes," he went on to say, "and dreams for their future now lie in the hands of others." He continued, "I am begging our government to help not only my family, but hundreds of others who are heartbroken as well, to demand the return of our American children who are being held in Japan." We then heard from Joshua Izzard, who explained to us that his only child, 2-year-old Melisanda, was torn away from him and everyone and everything she had known from birth in one cruel, selfish moment, and abruptly plunged into a strange world of darkness, mental illness, and danger in Russia. His daughter, an American citizen, was taken out of the country using temporary travel papers supplied by the Russian embassy. He told this committee that, quote, "Our great country must stop this constant bleeding of its most important resource, its citizens. As a nation, we need to put in place effective preventive mechanisms to assure that our citizens are not subjected to the daily unbearable sorrow that comes in the wake of an international parental kidnapping." We then heard from Carlos Bermudez, who has been battling for custody of his son, Sage, in the Mexican courts for 3 years, facing every delay tactic in the book. He expressed his frustration with the courts, but with all due respect, also with the Office of Children's Issues, which from his experience was like dealing with the DMV. He explained that when he requested government records of his son's entry and exit from the United States, OCI told him that it didn't have the information, and asking them for it was like asking a plumber to fix his electrical. He told them that he felt it was more like asking a general contractor to work with the plumber, and asked for their help to interface with other U.S. government agencies that would only tell him to work with OCI. Other parents at the hearing and since have echoed his frustration with OCI. Colin Bauer, whose 2 young sons, Noor and Ramsey, were abducted by his wife to Egypt 2 years ago with the assistance of the Egyptian government after his wife lost custody because of her drug use and psychological problems, conveyed to this committee his frustration over the lack of priority abduction cases received in foreign policy. He questioned why the United States was giving billions of dollars to Egypt in aid when Egypt was flagrantly violating valid U.S. court papers, preventing him from seeing his sons and otherwise aiding and abetting a kidnapping. I would note parenthetically, on Friday, I chaired a hearing in the Helsinki Commission on an ever-worsening problem that has not been focused upon the way it should be, and that is the abduction of Coptic girls who are then forced to become Muslims and then are forced into marriage usually on or after their 18th birthday. Dr. Michelle Clark, who is a leading expert on human trafficking, told us that there are thousands of these cases every year, and nary a whisper of discontent can be heard anywhere in the world about it. So we began to change that on Friday, and I do hope, while this panel will not address that, I did talk to Michael Posner earlier today, the Assistant Secretary for Human Rights, Democracy, and Labor, that this country and all countries need to speak out robustly on that horrific human rights abuse. Sarah Edwards told us, again, getting back to her situation with Egypt, that her nightmare began 2 weeks, this is Turkey, I should say, 2 weeks into her son Eli's vacation to Turkey with his father. She allowed the vacation based on a shared parenting agreement she and her estranged husband had negotiated together, but soon realized that her husband had used the agreement as a pretext for abduction. Turkey allowed him to divorce Ms. Edwards and gave him full custody of the son without Sarah Edwards being present or notified of the proceedings. Turkey, as we know, is a party to the Hague Convention, and Ms. Edwards has opened an application, but faces the daily threat of her estranged husband from him that he will run with the child to Syria. So he dangles that over her head that she will never see her son again. She explained an experience that is much like that of many other parents, stating, and I quote, "The obstacles I face fighting the abduction of my son are great. I am essentially on my own to fight a court battle in a foreign country where I do not know the language or understand the culture." Douglas Trombino, whose daughter Morgana was kidnapped to Colombia in November, testified and echoed the feelings of many left-behind parents when he said, quote, "Families must remain families. The family unit is critical to the success and growth of a child." He went on to say, "I want to be Morgana's dad. I want to touch and smell her and love her and interact with her and just love my daughter. Not through a computer screen," he went on. "I don't want to blow bubbles to her via Skype. I don't want to send Easter baskets via FedEx. And I don't want to have to go through customs for a mere 24 hours of daddy-daughter time. That, to me, is not being a father. I want to be Morgana's dad, her hero, her go-to 24/7 best friend," he concluded. And finally, we heard from David Goldman, who was here with us today, and he was the only parent who could tell of success. And although the Hague Convention requires the return of children within 6 weeks, David's arduous struggle was 5.5 years in the making. He told this committee that for years he lived in a world of despondency and desperation, with a searing pain throughout my entire being. Everywhere he turned, he saw an image of his abducted child. I would note that David Goldman never quit, just like the current group of left-behind parents who have drawn inspiration from David Goldman's success, as well as his courage and his love. And I hope he provides a pathway for all of us on how we can replicate that success and bring American children home. Indeed, the lessons learned from David Goldman's brave journey have been incorporated into H.R. 1940, the International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act of 2011. Specifically, the bill calls to establish an ambassador at large, wholly dedicated to international child abduction, not unlike what we have done with trafficking and very similar to what we've done with international religious freedom issues. To establish a robust and fully resourced office. The people in the office are doing a good job. They don't have enough resources, I would argue, and enough people dedicated to do this work. It would also prescribe a series of increasingly punitive actions and sanctions the President and the Department of State may impose on a nation that demonstrates, quote, a pattern of non-cooperation in resolving child abduction cases. Diplomatic overtures and admonishing words are simply not enough. And I would note we would also chronicle the misdeeds or positive deeds of countries that have not been Hague signers so that we can get a better sense as to what they are doing and not doing. So the pattern of non-cooperation would apply equally to Hague and non-Hague countries alike. Finally, in reading Assistant Secretary Kurt Campbell's testimony, and I deeply respect him and I thank him for being here, I do remain concerned that while expressing satisfaction that Japan may accede to the Hague Convention, the current 123 active cases involving 173 American children would not be covered by the treaty provisions. Patricia Appy, who testified at our May 24th hearing and was David Goldman's attorney, has noted that Article 35 of the Convention provides this Convention shall apply as between contracting states only to wrongful removals or retentions after entry into force in those states. So while I appreciate Secretary Campbell's obvious empathy and compassion for the children and the left-behind parents, and I'm encouraged that efforts will be made by state to, quote, resolve existing child abduction cases and allow parents currently separated from their children to reestablish contact with them and ensure visitation rights, the exclusive emphasis seems to be only on visitation and access and not return. To that end, I and many others urge the Obama administration to negotiate a memorandum of understanding or a bilateral agreement with the Japanese to ensure that the 123 left-behind parents and counting, because that number is likely to go up perhaps significantly before it is ratified, are not left behind a second time, this time by treaty promises and provisos that won't apply to them. Last week, I offered an amendment to the State Department reauthorization bill, backed by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Payne, and really the entire committee. Howard Berman spoke very positively of it, as did Chairwoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, that expressed the sense of Congress that the United States, by way of memorandum of understanding with the government of Japan and through all appropriate means, should seek the immediate return of all United States children wrongfully removed to or retained in Japan. Delay is denial, and it does exacerbate the abuse of a child and the agony of the left-behind parent. Because the Hague Convention, again, specifically precludes its protections to all existing abduction victims, entry into force, SONS and MOU, will likely produce or result in lost momentum and no return of current abducted American children. It is on behalf of left-behind parents, in recognition of the extreme pain they suffer as victims, and in recognition of our own duty as the U.S. government to help bring these kids home, that we hold this hearing today. Again, I want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here, which I will introduce momentarily, but yield to Mr. Payne for any opening comments.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you for calling this very important hearing. I'd also like to thank our distinguished witnesses for agreeing to testify here today. In May of this year, the subcommittee held a hearing entitled International Child Abduction, Broken Laws and Bereaved Lives. During that hearing, we heard heart-wrenching stories from the parents of children who had been internationally abducted and who are still fighting for their safe return. This hearing follows up on the first by examining how we can improve the implementation of the Hague Convention on the civil aspect of international child abduction. As you know, the Hague Convention is the principal mechanism by the United States and other countries enforce the return of internationally adopted children. A treaty of this nature has become increasingly important with the rise of both international travel and bicultural marriages. There are currently 86 parties to the Hague Convention, and in 2008, 60 of these nations were parties to 2,326 cases involving 3,179 children. The overall return rate of these was 46%, with 27% court-ordered. While the Hague Convention has served as an important tool in returning children to their legal guardians, there remain several areas in which the treaty inadequately or outright fails to protect the rights of parents. The most notable of these is the existence of non-signatories to the treaty. These nations have made no commitment to respect the custody arrangements in other countries and therefore are unlikely to participate in the extradition of a child on those grounds. Japan is the only group of 7 industrialized nations to not sign the treaty, has become the focus of international child abduction cases in recent years. The United States has the largest number of children abducted and denial of access disputes with Japan, with a total of 123 cases involving 173 disputed children. Congress has recognized this problem and passed H.R. Res. 1326, which called on Japan to join the Hague Convention and to return American children. Both Ranking Member Smith and I were co-sponsors of that resolution, as has been already indicated. In May of this year, Japan announced that it would submit legislation to their parliament to ratify the Hague Convention by the end of the year. While this is promising, Japan's parliament has been slow moving in recent years due to political turmoil, and because of the introduction of the legislation, it does not necessarily mean that the legislation will be successfully passed during this session of Parliament. Should Japan sign the agreement, there will need to be changes in their domestic laws in order to reflect the values of the international community. In Japan, joint custody is not recognized, and it is almost always the mother that is given sole custody. Fathers often lose the right to access and are unable to contact their children. This practice will need to change if Japan were to follow the provisions of the convention. While Japan is certainly receiving the bulk of the attention, of the 86 participating nations, only 4 are from East Asia: Hong Kong, Macau, Thailand, and Singapore. I'm interested in hearing from the panel how Japan's ratification of the convention might affect the other nations in the region. Beyond the existence of nations that refuse to take part in the treaty are controversial provisions that do govern participating nations. For example, the Hague Convention makes an important distinction between the right to custody and the right to access. I look forward to hearing and learning from the panelists here today on how we can make the progress and the process of returning a child faster and more fair between states that have signed the treaty, and how we approach cases where a non-signatory state is involved. We look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Carnahan.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for calling this hearing today, and to the witnesses. This is an issue that we need to be shining a light on. The 1980 Hague Convention on Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction is the principal international mechanism for the return of children. The convention does not address the issue of child custody directly, but it does address how to determine the jurisdiction where a child custody dispute should be adjudicated. The American Bar Association and their Center for Children and the Law conducted a survey of parents whose children have been taken or retained by another country by another parent. The key challenges they cited that a parent faces when trying to locate and recover children abducted to foreign countries include lack of sufficient funds, difficulties with foreign laws and officials, difficulties with U.S. laws, judges' inexperience in handling international abduction cases, and inadequate responses by law enforcement agencies. And the State Department has given us some numbers about the scope and size of this problem, including both Hague Convention and non-Hague Convention cases. The State Department Office of Children's Issues reports a total of 1,495 custody and access cases in 2010, involving a total of 2,123 children. So this is an issue that we need to be hearing more about, how we can get this process to work better, and appreciate what you all are here to do for us today. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for giving me the privilege of sitting with this panel, because As you know, I have a constituent, Colin Bauer, who is particularly concerned about this, and of course it's an issue that I am supportive of in general. I would say that we sometimes, I think, hold back in using our legitimate moral authority because we worry about somehow alienating other countries. Now, I want America to be reasonable and fair in its dealings with other people, but as a general rule, it does seem to me that most countries in this world need us more than we need them. I don't want to abuse that, but I think we sometimes assume that we can't press hard because people will get mad at us. Well, if I were many of these countries, I would be more worried about America getting mad at them. And again, I don't say that to the extent that we should be bullies or that we should be overly aggressive. I do think, however, that a reasonable assessment of what the relationships are should allow us to press cases on their merits and not be held back by some fear that we will somehow lose influence. I have to say, and we were all around during the days of the Cold War, that argument might have had some plausibility back then. I think even then it was overdone. But in today's world, I do not see any reason why American citizens seeking justice, especially in the most sensitive possible area, parents seeking justice with regard to their own children, I cannot think of a diplomatic reason in the cases I have seen that ought to retard our efforts. So I thank you for the extent to which you both, on a bipartisan basis, have allowed us to press this very important moral cause.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank. I'd like to now welcome our very two distinguished witnesses, beginning first with Ambassador Susan Jacobs, who currently serves as Special Advisor in the Office of Children's Issues at the State Department. Ambassador Jacobs has had a long and distinguished career in the Foreign Service, in which she has served around the world, including in Papua New Guinea, where she was the ambassador. She has also held a number of senior positions with the State Department in Washington, serving as a liaison to both Congress and the Department of Homeland Security. In addition, Ambassador Jacobs has recently visited Japan and participated in an international conference on the Hague Convention. And without objection, her full resume will be made a part of the record, and that of Dr. Campbell as well. Dr. Kurt Campbell currently serves as the Assistant Secretary of State in the State Department's Bureau of Asian and Pacific Affairs and has been in that position since June of 2009. Dr. Campbell has broad experience working with the government, having served as an officer in the Navy, in the Defense Department, National Security Council, the White House, and the Treasury Department. The only thing left is to run for Congress. In his time outside of government, he has founded an advisory firm focused on Asia, worked on international security issues at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and been a professor at Harvard. Ambassador Jacobs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the committee, and Mr. Frank, thank you for holding this important hearing and for the opportunity to update you on the hard work of my colleagues in the Department of State in responding to this global threat to the well-being of children. I also want to thank my colleague, Assistant Secretary Campbell, for his deep personal involvement in this issue. The problem of parental child abduction is deeply important to Secretary Clinton, who demonstrated her commitment to children by appointing me as her Special Advisor for Children's Issues last year. And tomorrow, the Bureau of Consular Affairs and Assistant Secretary Janice Jacobs and Assistant Secretary Campbell will hold another town hall meeting with a group of left-behind parents, and this will be the 6th such town hall meeting to date. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Payne, your leadership and involvement in this area strengthens the U.S. government's message to foreign courts and central authorities in long-standing abduction cases. My written statement goes into detail about my role, the role of the Office of Children's Issues, and the Department of State in general on this topic. Let me assure you that we are all committed to resolving current abduction cases, reuniting parents and children, and helping prevent future abductions. We strive to do what is in the best interest of children caught in these tragic situations. Case officers in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, Office of Children's Issues, and Foreign Service officers at our embassies and consulate overseas work hard to achieve this goal every day. Unless we succeed in returning a child to the United States, we have not been successful. As you know, we have abduction cases to both Hague and non-Hague countries. We work equally hard in both areas to return children to the United States. As this chart demonstrates, over the past 5 years, we are increasing our success in achieving returns from both Hague and non-Hague countries. It is interesting to note that the non-Hague return numbers have remained about the same, while Hague returns have steadily been increasing. Of course, the existence of the Hague Convention makes our work easier in some ways, but we often encounter other challenges. In non-Hague countries, we rely on quiet diplomacy, knowledge of local conditions, and respect for local customs, and often less visible means to try to resolve an international abduction case. The Hague Convention remains our best hope of resolving international abductions. It is the first subject that I bring up with foreign governments during my travels on behalf of the Secretary. Parental abductions are tragedies that affect American families both in the United States and overseas. When a parent flees with a child across a state line, there is certainty that a court order from one state will be recognized in another. For a left-behind parent, there may be stress and fear, but there's also belief in the American judicial system and the rule of law. When a parent takes a child across an international border under false pretenses, the left-behind parent is faced with the daunting task of navigating unfamiliar legal, cultural, and linguistic barriers. They suffer emotional trauma and face significant and long-term financial stress to reunite with their children. We are fully committed to serving left-behind parents and children who are the victims of this crime. Let me give you some highlights of what we have been doing lately. Today, the Office of Children's Issues is one of the largest offices in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. We have almost 100 people working on abductions. The growth of the office enables us to broaden our prevention activities, ensure consistently high standards of service, improve training, and engage more vigorously with other countries. It also allows us to monitor and improve our own compliance with the Convention. The Convention, although a successful operating agreement, is not a perfect instrument. Fostering compliance with the treaty is an ongoing challenge. Over the last few years, the Department has participated in numerous judicial conferences and met with officials from 23 countries. The efforts are paying off, and my written statement details improving relationships, but not perfect ones, with Mexico, Brazil, Switzerland, and Bulgaria. In non-convention countries, examples of successful cases highlight how the Department of State can play an invaluable role in helping left-behind parents understand foreign laws and their options, and we can point to some recent successes in the Philippines and in Iraq. In conclusion, I want to assure you that we continue to develop programs and outreach to prevent abductions through increasing awareness of the issue. We work with other agencies, with non-governmental organizations. We use social media in what we hope is a creative way, and we utilize our own consular affairs resources. Your support remains vital. We hope that Congress will extend visa ineligibilities for those who abduct or aid abduction to convention countries as it now exists in non-Hague countries. We also hope that Congress will continue to support us in offering financial assistance to the Hague Permanent Bureau. Congressional interest remains crucial as we encourage other countries to join the convention. Since accepting this challenging and rewarding position, I've met with many left-behind parents, some of whom are here today, and I have been deeply moved by their stories. I want to reiterate to them and to you that we will never forget our duty to serve each of our citizens and, most importantly, our children. And I will be pleased to take your questions when appropriate.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jacobs. Dr. Campbell.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, and let me join Ambassador Jacobs by just saying that we very much appreciate your compassion, your commitment to this incredibly difficult subject, and frankly, your activities have also both motivated me and have given me a model for how to do my job. And I also want to associate myself with my former Congressman, Congressman Frank. I think his perspective is at least the perspective that I try to use when undertaking the various aspects of this job. Let me just say that, as the ambassador has indicated, this is a human tragedy that, unless you experience and have a chance to get to know these brave parents, is just impossible to imagine. And I've been struck by their commitment, by their compassion, by a patience to try to keep at it, even when I can't imagine how they go on, to be perfectly honest. And every single one of them has demonstrated the kind of courage that I'm not sure I myself would be able to summon in such a circumstance. The first time I had a chance to meet with the parents was on a previously scheduled meeting with the parents. I had just been confirmed in my job. And I remember sitting down with them, and we had our team at the State Department. And after about 15 minutes into the meeting, I just have to say I was just woefully embarrassed. We just had not done a good enough job. We were not organized. We had not brought to bear the full capacities of the U.S. government. And frankly, we just apologized there on the scene and just said, we've got to do a better job. That was about 2.5 years ago. Since then, we've put together, working very closely with my colleagues and in consular affairs, probably one of the most substantial task forces we have inside the U.S. government that involve key officials from the White House, from the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, various other legal groups around the U.S. government, every aspect of the State Department, also linking in with my colleagues on a very regular basis in Tokyo. I will also say Ambassador Jacobs' job is primarily global. Mine is in Asia. The two countries we've worked most on over the course of the last 3 years are Japan and South Korea. And I'm very pleased to say, although it has not come up, South Korea in January of this year agreed to accede, and they are well along in the implementing language. And I will tell you that the steps that they have taken are very impressive, and we often highlight them as a model for what we'd like to see with respect to Japan. So I just want to underscore that we take this extraordinarily seriously. Every single meeting that Secretary Clinton has with her counterparts, this comes up. Every single meeting. Every meeting I have, this has come up. I've met with almost all the key officials in Japan on numerous occasions. And I think, as has been pointed out, Congressman Smith, the most senior officials in the Japanese government have indicated that they're going to sign the Hague Convention. Now, I can understand why certain friends would say, well, that's a step, but it's not that impressive. You have no idea how hard it was to get to this point. And I will also underscore, and you mentioned it a little bit in your testimony, it would be very hard to describe some of the cultural challenges that we face in a variety of different countries. It is not unusual in Japan, after a divorce, that a father will rarely, if ever, see their children. So this is an issue that is not simply a source of great concern for the United States, but I must tell you, it is an issue that's gaining momentum in Japan as well. And we actually hope to use this campaign to help people understand what we believe are some of the deep problems associated with separating families in this way. So I want to underscore that we did not do a good enough job. But what we are trying to do now is make sure all of our databases are completely up to date, very regular communications. When we get specific information about where we've dropped the ball, which that's why they call it government, after all, we try to follow up, make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps to be responsive to these particular issues. And to be honest, if I ever hear of someone, at least that I have some responsibility over, I work with, that doesn't treat one of these parents with respect and doesn't understand the nature of the tragedy that they're dealing with, we often will immediately look for a new assignment for that person. And so I just want to underscore, and if I could suggest, Congressman, if you'd like, we're going to have a long meeting tomorrow afternoon. I would welcome, if you'd like to come to part of that, or a member of your staff, we would welcome it. Some of that is going to be, some of that will be just on executive business, but I'd love for you to come, perhaps speak, and I'd welcome it. I think it'd be a great thing, and frankly, I need to underscore that bringing attention to this issue is important. I don't want to go on too long, but I just want to make a couple of other points, if I can, before we open up to questions. Our most important relationship in Asia by an order of magnitude is with Japan. The U.S.-Japan security relationship is of utmost importance, and I stand really next to no man in terms of my commitment to this relationship. I will do anything to preserve a strong relationship between the United States and Japan because I believe it is in our mutual interests. One of the greatest sadnesses that I have in this relationship, I've been to Japan over 200 times in the last 25 years, and I've talked to innumerable Japanese friends about this matter. Japanese people are a compassionate, wonderful people, and when they are educated and know about a topic, you can count on them to do the right thing. But I am struck again and again and again and again when we meet with Japanese friends and talk about these issues, the level of misunderstanding on these issues is profound, deep, and sometimes almost uniform. There is a view that these families are divided because of abuse, and there is not a deep and recognition of some of the legal challenges that, frankly, we are coping with. And so no matter what we do going forward, and this will be an important part of the effort associated with the Hague Convention, is an education campaign. And the area where I would like to see more support, not only from the families and others, but I want very much for Japan to have a better sense of the human dimension here. And I'm doing what I can to support this. I must just take a moment for kudos. The ambassador that I've worked the most on this with is Ambassador Roos. No one has done more on this issue than Ambassador Roos. And he's made it his personal commitment and has met with all the organizations, many of the legal groups inside Japan to support this. And I will say that in many cases, it's very hard to determine progress in life. We work on things for a long period of time, and it's hard to see progress. I have to honestly and modestly suggest that we have made real progress in the last 2 years, and there is a big change underway in Japan. And we anticipate when the Japanese leader visits in September that we're going to see a big step forward. And that would not have been possible, frankly, without your leadership, Congressman, and without the passion and commitment of the parents behind me. I also want to say that there are a couple of people, young people, professionals, Todd Campbell and others, who've been relentless on this and have also been seized by the importance of this. The signing of the Hague Convention, as you've indicated, Congressman, is in no way just simply a first step or a last step. It has to be part of a process, and we have underscored in all our conversations with Japanese interlocutors at the highest level that what we are concerned by is not just cases going forward, not just improving practices going forward, but retroactive cases that came before or that come before the signing of the agreement. But here I must underscore to you, and I appreciate the information that's been provided to you, there are actually many cases globally where countries, particularly in Europe, once having signed the Hague Convention, then implement legislation or laws that allow us to deal with pre-existing cases. And that we have made very clear with Japanese colleagues is important from our perspective. Now, the truth is we need a legal framework. We need an understanding of this issue that is global as a necessary first step. This is not easy work. It's painstaking. I also understand and appreciate the profound impatience. You want to get to this and try to see immediate progress on these specific cases. We have tried to underscore to Japan that even during this difficult period when they have some confusion in their government, we have some of that ourselves, they are still determined to take the necessary steps. The legal changes in their canon of laws are quite deep, but their government appears prepared to take the necessary steps. And I must tell you, quietly, we've had a very significant dialogue with them about what we expect in the implementing legislation and how we will not rest until we see the kinds of changes that are necessary, and that we will certainly not abide by loopholes or other steps that will, frankly, somehow negate or water down the essential provisions of the legislation as a whole. I'd also like to say this very carefully and directly. We have not ruled out any other legal process. We've not ruled out anything in our overall approach. And I will also say quite directly, we have also explored certain aspects associated with the extradition process. I'm not going to talk about that any more directly. I want to just simply underscore that we view every tool on the table with respect to resolving this important issue. I still think the process has gone too slow. I'd like to see it speeded up, and frankly, one of the most important things that we can do on this issue is to increase awareness in Japan and to make clear that that Americans are a patient people, but we also have our limits, and that while our preference is to solve these issues in a way that deeply respects the national dignity, the cultural sensitivities of all involved, we do reach points in struggles where we have to look at other means, and we are approaching that situation. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see the necessary steps very shortly. We're looking forward to a deeper process with respect to Japan on implementing language, and we also want to see specific progress on particular cases. With that, and I'm sorry to go on so long, Congressman, I thank you for your opportunity to appear here today.
Dr. Campbell, thank you very much, and thank you for both of your, and I said this in the outset, the strongest possible empathy and concern. There's no doubt about that. The key is how do we work out the best resourcing, and I know Ambassador Jacobs, you mentioned some 100 people working, which leads to one, I guess we would call it an oversight question. Back in 2000, I was the prime author of the Admiral Nance Meg Donovan Foreign Relations Act of 2000. Section 201 of that act directed the Office of Children Issues to report to each parent who has requested assistance at least once every 6 months on the current status of the abducted child's case and the efforts by the State Department to resolve the case. How is that being done? Perhaps it's being done even more robustly than that. And secondly, what is the average case count per Foreign Service officer?
Thank you for that question. I'm pleased to tell you that we are talking to the parents at least twice a year and more often when there is a change in the case. And also thanks to congressional oversight, which limited the caseload to 75. Most officers only have a caseload of about 65 cases, but we have teams of officers working on abductions with case assistance. So what you have done for us is to make it possible for us to have more information about the cases, to continue to do training, to improve our professionalism, and to just keep on top of all of the issues that are involved. So I thank you for that. One of the
amendments that we were able to get into the Foreign Ops Bill, it got pared down a little bit in conference, and the final wording was still, I think, very good. And that was to ensure that the left-behind parents knew that one good advocate or one course that they might choose if they wanted to opt in would be to contact their congressman or senators or both. And I'm wondering how that is being implemented. Are members being systematically advised, observant of Privacy Act concerns and the like, when they have somebody in their district who's a left-behind parent?
As far as I understand, when we open a case and the first time we talk to the left-behind parent, we tell them that they might want to contact their senator or congressman, because we fully believe that your engagement really helps us. When congressmen visit overseas and they raise these cases, it helps us tremendously to keep the momentum going forward in seeking a resolution to the cases, and we appreciate your help.
If you could maybe elaborate on that, how many congressmen have been so notified? Because again, members on both sides of the aisle, Mr. Frank is fighting tooth and nail to help his constituent. We all do that, and we think we do it well. We want to work in concert as a team, to use your phrase, with the department. But if we don't know about it, we could travel to a country where somebody could be in the same city with a abducted child and have no clue unless we're somehow brought into the mix.
As far as I understand the process, we tell the parents that they should contact their congressman. We don't do that directly, because at that point we don't know if that's what they want to do. So if they do it and then congressional staff inform us, then we can track the case, and if you're traveling, then we can give you points that you can use in these discussions. I mean, we want to be as helpful as possible, as transparent as possible, and giving you the information.
What I'm trying to get at is that, and the reason why I wrote the language, which Nita Lowy accepted, and Kay Granger was actually the one who brought it to her at our request, was to say there's value added. We may be, the other side of town and, a co-equal branch of government, but we do have caseworkers, and we do take this personally, and we, particularly members who, like Mr. Payne and I on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the interface that we have with diplomats is every day. But if we don't know about a case, so I hope it's being done very enthusiastically.
It's done very enthusiastically because we really need your help and support.
Let me ask you a question with regards to reciprocity. One of the more disturbing issues is the lack of understanding that American judges rely upon with regards to reciprocity obligations in the treaty. How does an American judge know not to send a child for summer vacation, for example, to a country that has both been either non-compliant or exhibiting patterns of non-compliance?
We have a network of Hague judges who do an awful lot of training, and I think that this is a concern that they would raise. Judges can also certainly call us, and we can provide information if they ask it. Unfortunately, we don't always know when these cases are being held. So what we have to rely on is a lot of training, a lot of work with our Hague network of judges, and encouraging them to do a lot of training so that these issues are at the forefront.
Let me ask you, I offered an amendment to the DOD authorization bill, and it largely came out of Paul Toland's case, which I know you're very well aware of, which is a heartbreaker and a very long case. He got very bad advice from the JAG. And I know there's been one meeting. Have there been additional meetings to get DOD and particularly Okinawa and some of the places where there's more likely to be this kind of abuse of children who have been abducted?
Thank you for raising that. I appreciate it. We have been doing, since your amendment to the DOD bill, a lot of work on training with DOD. We've had meetings with the chief legal counsels of all 5 services. We've done some JAG trainings, both in person and through webinars, and I think we're making some progress. And they have given us direct points of contact as we have given them so that they can communicate directly with us should they have any concerns about a case, because I think military personnel are at risk for this.
Now, is this something that a status of forces agreement needs to incorporate? It seems to me that, and Dr. Campbell, you very rightly point out in your testimony and orally, I mean, Japan is a great friend and strategic ally. They are key to both of ours and theirs protection in that part of the world, or security. And yet, if, as is the case, several of our service members have had children abducted, and in the case of Paul Toland, it was in Yokohama, and he was stationed there. It seems to me that the Japanese ought to be more forthcoming and say, it's in their own interest to ensure that the courts are much more responsive than they were in his case and virtually every one of the other cases.
One of the things that we've learned over the process, and frankly, lots of help from the parents in this, is that I think in certain circumstances we have seen a culture of complicity in terms of providing passports sometimes in situations that were inappropriate, legal corners cut that would favor certain outcomes. And one of the things that we've tried to underscore is that we are looking carefully at every aspect of this. And so one of the things that Susan has said is that, there are the issues going forward and the issues that are pre-existing. And we're trying essentially to divide our time to ensure that we address both issues. For instance, changing the procedures under which passports are issued, Japanese passports in particular, are issued, has been a source of enormous pressure that we are trying to bring to bear, because as it currently stands, although it is changing, it is possible to get a passport without appearing in person.
Yeah.
And we've also indicated that steps that would somehow be taken that would facilitate such steps by someone with diplomatic privileges would be viewed very negatively by the United States, and we would lodge some formal and official complaints. Furthermore, the efforts that you're talking about, particularly in Okinawa and around Yokosuka, are well underway. There's much more knowledge and understanding, frankly, not simply for the Japanese, but for American service members who don't often know the nature of their own legal rights and responsibilities. And so we've tried working with sort of an embassy, consular, and Janice's good folks, working with JAGs, but not just JAGs, the leading commanders of our major bases, both in Japan and Korea, so that there is a better understanding of the nature of some of the existing laws and some of the problems that a service man or woman might run into.
With regards to Michael Elias's case, obviously, the Japanese government said they were investigating. Have they concluded that investigation? Is she being held liable, criminally or civilly, in any way? And I traveled with Michael Elias's parents, and they would not even allow the taking parent for the grandparents to visit with Jade and Michael Jr. The tears that were shed on that, and there are people in this room who have shed those tears every day, and it must be doubly hard at midnight to morning when the full weight of this abduction weighs upon their hearts. Can you tell us about Michael Elias's case? And let me just say, and this will underscore, after I got involved with David Goldman's case, people literally walked into my office. Patrick Braden was one of those who's here as well, and his daughter Melissa was abducted. He remains very concerned about her welfare and well-being for reasons you know and I know as well, based on the case. We went over to the embassy, couldn't even get a meeting, and I'll never forget this. It was her birthday that day, and a birthday cake was out, on the sidewalk. Candles were lit. We all sang happy birthday to his little daughter, Melissa, halfway around the world. The insensitivity was mind-boggling on the part of the Japanese government. And you talked about sensitivity. Here's a man being deprived access to his daughter, and really, custody ought to be given. And the abducting case, as we all know, Michael Elias's, absolute fraud seems to have been perpetrated, duplicate set of passports created, and of course Toland and all the others, many of whom are here. I hope the Japanese government gets that. This is not going away. It's only going to get worse in terms of congressional scrutiny. 2 weeks ago, a group of parliamentarians were here from the Diet, and they asked that we withhold food aid to North Korea because of what? Abductions. And I'm with them on the issue of abductions, whether or not food aid is the proper way because of starvation that is massive in North Korea, whether or not that's a way of, I would argue it's not, but still their point about abductions, I agree 1,000%. Well, apply that equally to American left-behind parents. Let me ask a very specific question, two-part, and then I'll yield to Mr. Payne for any questions he might have, and then Mr. Frank. You point out that among the reasons that the court could reject a petition, this is Japan, of course, and to Dr. Campbell, to you, would be, and I guess it's based on Article 13B of the treaty, the taking parent has been abused or is likely to be further abused. I hope that we're insisting in our bilateral with them that this better be evidence-based and not just the mere assertion. Secondly,
course.
I'm sure you are, but if you could just articulate, that would be helpful. Secondly, the taking parent faces criminal prosecution, and I know that very seldom is our prosecutions, and you might want to speak to this. The International Parental Kidnapping Crime Act does allow for prosecutions, but they are rarely done, and maybe you might want to speak to how often they are done, because it would be very helpful to know that, and for Hague countries, it is not done. But these are pre-Hague. And then the taking parent cannot meet the financial cost of living in another country. Seems to me that is like a loophole that you could drive a Mack truck through. You could say, I can't buy a ticket, or the taking parent, or it may cost too much, and that becomes an opt-out. That would be rife with exploitation on the part of the taking parent if they were to be able to assert that. So I hope we're pushing back, and please speak to that. And finally, if you would, Dr. Campbell, if you could speak to the issue of a sidebar bilateral agreement and a MOU, which, again, this committee went on record recently as last week calling for that. I hope that we do it on the full floor of the House. It seems that there may be no other way. I know your intentions are absolutely pristine and good, that maybe the atmosphere may open up the possibility, but I think the day that ascension occurs becomes a day that the left-behind parents, whatever that number is on that day, is a day of mourning, because it is more likely that the door just slammed right in their face. So if you could speak to that as well.
Thank you for all those questions, and we'll try to address them. In our discussions with the Japanese after they announced their intention to ratify the Hague Convention, we talked to them very specifically about taking reservations under Section 13B, which deals with domestic violence. And it was, I met with them, they sent a delegation to the Special Commission of the Hague in June, and we had a side meeting with them about this and said, how are you going to determine? And they said there would be a separate judicial hearing to talk about domestic violence before the Hague return hearing was held. And we made the point that there have to be provisions for the left-behind parent to be able to represent him or herself at those hearings, and they agreed to that. I think that there'll have to be significant changes in Japanese law. We just had one of our Hague attorneys visiting in Japan, doing training with them, and he made those same points, and they seem to understand it. So I'm hoping that all of these things the efforts that we're making in training and discussions with them will make a difference and make the exceptions that they take livable. Now, many countries take exceptions to certain parts of the convention, as we did on providing free judicial assistance. And so we just have to make sure that the form of these reservations that they're taking doesn't interfere with the real intent of the treaty, which is to get the children back to the United States.
What about the other two provisions, Dr.
Now, the
Campbell?
other, on the criminal aspect of it, the Hague Convention does envision civil remedies. And I think that if there is a return, I mean, that's the best way for it to be. I don't know right now of any cases where we're not, I mean, the State Department is not a law enforcement entity, so we have to rely on the FBI, and then the FBI would have to go to federal prosecutors to initiate a case. I'm not aware that any cases are active right now. So, I mean, that isn't to say that there could be cases that are in the works. And so that is not something that I can really respond to.
If I could just be clear on that, Congressman, Assistant Secretary Jacobs has been very careful here. I think we would just simply say that we're not ruling anything out, and we have explored a lot of different options. And tomorrow in our private session, we'll be able to go over a little bit of this. But shall we say that we've looked at every case. We've also been involved in, shall we say, an education campaign. Some of the problems that we have, frankly, are local law enforcement who don't fully understand some of the circumstances, and working with various regional law enforcement entities and judicial entities, we have explored a variety of options. And we just want to underscore, and when in diplomacy, when you say you're not going to take something off the table, there's a very clear intent associated with that. And I just would like to stand by that, if I may.
Could I just ask you, when you talk about the violence issue, if a court of competent jurisdiction in the United States had an enforceable order and allegations of violence were not asserted, or if they were found to be infirm, does the court, or would they contemplate that in Japan they would take that all up like it's brand new ground, or would, like in keeping with the spirit of the 1996 convention, look to enforce each other's court orders? Because that is a major, otherwise it starts all over with a potentially false allegation of violence that has to be adjudicated all over again, and
exactly,
as we know from David Goldman's case, where there was no violence ever asserted, but they used the courts, or misused the courts, for 5.5 long years, and to the tune of $500,000 on his part.
The President signed the Protection of the Child Convention in October, and we are exploring, we're working very actively with the Uniform Law Commission to figure out what implementing legislation we will need. This convention would be a great complementary convention to the Abduction Convention because it calls for recognition of foreign custody orders. And if there were a custody order, then we could present that, and it would really eliminate so many problems.
That's a huge deal.
It would be done. And so that is something
that's
that
our
we're
goal.
looking at.
That's our goal here.
Yes.
Can I also say, Congress, one other thing that we've tried to do, and again, thank the parents. Sometimes they come up with the most creative ideas and suggestions. And so in the immediate aftermath of this, horrible tragedy, this, tsunami, nuclear challenge that Japan has faced, some of the parents contacted us and said, look, we're worried about the well-being of our family, of our children. And working closely with Consular Affairs, we made it so that every single one of those children could get a passport, American passport. So now, unfortunately, that was not taken advantage of. But we're going to look to take creative steps, both legal, procedurally, and the like. It is also the case, if I may say, and I want to be careful about this, we have in the last many months had a couple of other cases where we've made progress, where the particular parent has been reluctant to put too much attention on it for fear that there will be backtracking. And so I do think we are starting to get a critical mass, both inside the Japanese government, certainly in the U.S. government. And if I can just conclude with this one thing, Congressman, the biggest surprise in my job, when I was in the Pentagon at a lower level 10 years ago, I had a lot of people that were interested in foreign policy and a lot of, issues. I don't see very much of that today. I see a lot of insular congressional focus, even on, and this is not just about American livelihoods, but it's also about how we interact with the world. I'd love to have more people like you and Congressman Payne focused on this, but I don't see as much as I would have anticipated.
Well, one way of doing that is reaching out to those members of Congress, House and Senate, when there's an abducted, really tell them how much value added that potentially could be. We would have more members here, I think, if they had someone in their district that all of a sudden it becomes very real and very personal to them. And if you could speak, because you didn't answer the question on that final question about the MOU.
Oh, yes, I will. I will say, honestly, Congressman, almost every hearing is like this. So I hope you're right, and I would like to see that, and I think we will take further steps. But I find that is the general issue. We have had some discussions. From the Japanese perspective, it's a complete non-starter. And the key here is the letter U, understanding. It requires a degree of partnership and engagement on the Japanese side Their view is that we are addressing this according to your concerns. You've asked us to work on the issues associated with Hague. We've indicated that we need to see progress on existing cases. But on this particular issue, they're not prepared to go down this path. They said, look, we're better to focus on these other matters. And I think in many respects.
But again, Mrs. Secretary, too, and Dr. Campbell, what is our position? Is it our position to push for an MOU and a bilateral agreement?
If we could get an agreement with the Japanese government to return these children, we would have sought it years ago.
But are we pushing for that agreement at the highest levels? I know we pushed for Hague, and kudos for that. But again, the day they sign is a bittersweet day for the left-behind parents, because by definition, they are excluded because it is all from date of entry into force onward, and the door closes behind them.
Yeah,
I mean, the idea is that the Japanese should say all in. We're all in. We mean it. And it's a test of their sincerity, frankly.
I think we have always pursued two tracks, both of which are incredibly important. One was getting these children returned to the United States, and the other is Hague. And we're not going to give up on getting the children back to the United States. And we'll figure out a way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Payne?
Could I, Mr. Chairman, I have to, and I apologize, but I've been my committee, if you just give me 1 minute, Don. I have some questions I will submit in writing to Ambassador Jacobs, because I can tell they're not going to be answered publicly. They have to do with law enforcement. I mean, I want to get to the issue of, in some cases, we have clear-cut violations of the law. Now, I understand you're not the FBI, but I'm going to submit some specific questions, both about extradition and about visa revocation for people who've been involved. But I would suggest, too, Mr. Chairman, I think probably this is a inter-committee thing, and I think it would probably be useful if this subcommittee, which has been the leader in this, would be to talk to our colleagues at Judiciary and have a joint confidential briefing of those of us who are interested. And let's pursue the case of extradition. Let's pursue the case of visa revocation. That is, I understand I'm not going to get public answers, because I'm talking about some punitive actions against individuals. But I would be glad to participate. I'm sure our colleagues in Judiciary would, and we would ask for a private briefing so we would have no holds barred. And I would just want to put people on notice. I want to know, who are you trying to extradite, and why not, if not? And what about visas, and what about other very specific sanctions? Mr. Chairman and Mr. Payne, thank you very much for accommodating me.
We would welcome that opportunity, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. I know that there's a time constraint. I understand the witnesses wanted to be out by 4, so I see that that's the case. I need to stop now. Right. But I'll be brief, just in order for you to meet other commitments that you may have. I just might ask you, Ambassador Jacobs, as you note in your testimony, the Office of Children's Issues in the U.S. Central Authority for incoming and outgoing applicants pursuant to the Hague Convention. In 2010, the State Department's Office of Children's Issues reported 1,495 international custody and access cases involving 2,123 children. Now, this is twice the number of cases reported in 2006. And if indeed we start to really circulate memorandums or dear colleagues asking members of Congress, do you have any concerns and issues, we would certainly assume that there would even be a quantum leap in the number of cases. So my question is, how is the budget, and as you may know, there are proposed cuts in this area, and do you have the ability to handle the number of cases now in this U.S. Central Authority, the Children's Issue Group, and with the expectation that there will indeed be a bump up just by virtue of there being more attention paid to this issue? We don't want to raise expectations and then you'd be unable to handle the load. I just wonder if you could deal with that for a moment, Ambassador.
Thank you for that question, sir. Because of the congressional limit on the number of cases that each officer can handle, we are able to hire to meet demand. The cases that are open are an accumulation from the last, these are all the open cases. The 1491 children are the total cases that are still open over the years. Mm-hmm. And some of them, most of them are active, and we try to talk to the parents, call them, make sure that they are still interested in pursuing a return. But we always, if we had more money, we could do more training, we could do more outreach. I mean, there are a lot of good things that we could do with additional funding, as could the Permanent Bureau of the Hague. So we welcome your interest, and we will call on you to help us. Thank you, sir.
All right, just another quick question. We, although the United States, Ambassador Jacobs, criminalizes international parental child abductions, we know other countries do not, including several of the Asian Pacific region in that area. According to the State Department's Office of Children's Issues website, examples include Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand. So I guess my question is, to what extent, in your opinion, is criminalization or criminalizing international parent-child abduction an important policy tool, and what are its merits and limitations as an effective means to prevent, combat, and punish international parental child abduction?
Thank you for that very difficult question. Mm-hmm. I think that I can understand why we have criminalized international child abduction. It is a crime. Other countries don't view it that way. In discussions, for example, that I had in India, I was told that it's impossible for a parent to abduct their child. And if countries would join the Hague, then we could work on civil remedies. We would be able to use diplomacy in order to get these children back. Having the criminal remedy on the table, I think, makes it difficult for some countries to cooperate with us. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep pushing them to do what they ought to do.
In that same regard, evidently there are certainly cultural differences around the world. I mean, it's understatement. In some cultures, evidently, the maternal part of the view of the family, just in general, that it may be just that a mother is just the natural. If there's one parent, the natural move is for it to be the mother. They are more compassionate, supposedly. They will do a better job. It's the culture in many instances. And so neither one of you can handle that. How much do you feel that there are just honest beliefs that their culture, I mean, I'm not talking about criminality or anything, but just a normal divorce case, so to speak, in India or Malaysia, the culture would, do you think, have a way of creeping into the decisions, even if it's not intentional, but it's just a matter of the culture?
Thank you for that. I do think it's cultural, and I suggest to people that they watch Kramer versus Kramer, which shows that a father can be a loving, caring parent and can do just as good a job raising a child as a mother can.
And we find that even here in the United States, to be truthful, in parental custody cases, you've almost got to be a Lady Simon agree to not get the custody in a lot of instances. So.
No, unfortunately, I think there is that bias, and it still exists in many countries. In the Middle East, it's assumed that the mother will raise the child until a certain age, and then the custody goes to the father, and that can be another difficulty. But there are biases, and that's why we like the Hague, because it eliminates gender bias. and it's based on habitual residence of the child, and it eliminates a lot of those issues.
Can I just, two things, Congressman, these are excellent questions. The first, on the issue of the legal status associated with child abduction, and I think Ambassador Jacobs is clear that sometimes in certain circumstances that it's created some challenges with other countries, but it is also the case that almost all countries have specific jurisdictional issues and assignments associated with kidnapping. And it is those set of issues on which we believe that we can make substantial progress. That would be the first point. The second is that would that it be just maternal issues. In truth, in many societies, it goes even further than that. There are both maternal issues and there are also ethnic issues that come to play, sometimes that overcome maternal issues. And so these are very complicated, very deep-seated, and hard to tease out and also hard to confront sometimes. And to be perfectly honest, as the Ambassador indicates, there are many aspects of Hague that you'd say, well, imperfect. But overall, it's a remarkably effective tool to address an issue that is going to grow in magnitude because the number of cross-national marriages has increased dramatically in the last decade and will again in the next decade.
Well, thank you very much. I think that it is important that we support international organizations like this, and I think that the Hague is the type that we would agree. Although we're seeing somewhat of a growing move on some political philosophies that we withdraw from international groups, and so I think that if that trend tends to continue, we are going to find ourselves at a disadvantage when things like the Hague and other, and in my opinion, most international organizations tend to do much more good than some of the times when they're not as effective as we would like them to be. So because of your time, I'll yield back, and Chairman may have some other questions. Thank you.
Just a few follow-ups. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne, for your questions. If I could ask a couple of final questions, and I know you do have to leave, and I thank you for your patience. Left Behind parents have received conflicting reports as to whether their specific cases have been raised by name with Japan. One Left Behind parent received a response to his inquiry that states the following, and I'll just quote it. It's from an email. We have the email. The State Department has not formally demanded the return of any abducted children. As you know, one of the challenges inherent in resolving parental-child abduction cases is overcoming the differences in law between sovereign nations. The policy of the United States government is to use bilateral relations to press for ratification of or compliance to the Hague Convention, and for non-Hague countries, such as Japan, to assist Left Behind parents in obtaining access or return of their children. Is this email accurate? Do we raise specific cases with the Japanese, and do we then report to the Left Behind parent as to what it is that was gleaned from those conversations?
Yes, sir, we do. We do raise individual cases with the permission of the parents, and then we report back to them on
Is
what
that
we've
uniform with each parent, or is it on
It's up to the parent. I think some of the parents have asked us not to raise their individual cases.
So everyone who wants their case raised by name with the Japanese government, and who are your interlocutors?
I mean,
Yes,
I'm not a
Campbell.
consular official, but I've
Right.
been in many meetings where cases have been made directly at very high levels. And so it's very hard. I don't know who that email's from. I don't know what it's referring to. All I can tell you is I have sat watching either our ambassador in Japan or a consular official go through the particulars of a particular case, not with a legal person, but a higher level political person in Japan, in order to make an important point that these are not just faceless people, just statistics, that we have real people behind these cases.
Well,
that we want to answer.
the person at OCI is Courtney Hauk, and I'm not sure what she means by has not formally demanded the return of any abducted children.
I don't know. I can't.
We'll find out, and we will get back to
I
you,
don't know
sir.
what that means, but
We'll get back to you on that.
Let me, if I could, in your testimony, you point out 123 active abductions involving 173 children. That's 17 more children than just 2.5 months ago. Is that because more children have been abducted, or new cases have just come into the office, or what? How do you?
I think I can answer that, but one of the things that I think we found generally when we started looking at these cases is that the database was not uniform. A lot of cases had sort of fallen off, and so Janice's organization, Consular Affairs, all of our people in Tokyo have made a concerted effort to contact every single person we can and try to figure out what are the active cases. It is my belief that those cases reflect a greater precision of what the nature of the existing pool is, not new cases in the last 3 months. It is also the case that there are some families, some separated families that were not aware of, some organizations not aware, and because of publicity, again, a good thing, that they have joined in this overall effort. So I think that is the primary. I don't believe there's been any new cases of note over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Just 2 final questions. Michael Elias's ex-wife has denied any welfare and whereabouts visits with the children. In that case or in any other like it, what do we do next?
I
mean, he doesn't even know if his children are okay.
I totally understand. I completely understand. I mean, there are several. I mean, a very difficult case like this, Congressman. The truth is, you have to work on many fronts. The first front is, again, try to establish the larger overarching legal framework, which is the Hague, to establish the framework, and then work on the corresponding implementing language. We press Japanese authorities who are in touch with various taking parents to very assertively make the case about, okay. Yes, can I just tell you, I'm just been informed, and I apologize for this, that the nuclear crisis did cause some left-behind parents to get back in touch, and we reopened some of those cases. So that, I think that, I think is what I was trying to say in terms of these are cases that have already been, that have been in the works or have been around for many, many years, but they are reopened because of the nuclear case. But I don't think there's been anything new, not a new abduction, yes. So,
were the children minors throughout? Why weren't they?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know the nature, but I didn't want to give you inaccurate information on that. So let me just say that it is also the case that we find that many of the taking parents have legal counsel in Japan. There are a group of lawyers that specialize in Japanese law, what their rights are and how to use aspects of Japanese law. Almost all of the most difficult cases we have found, or many of them, involve legal advice that, while is technically accurate within the Japanese context, is frankly extraordinarily unhelpful. And we have also asked Japanese authorities to look carefully at some of these activities as a whole. The truth is, Congressman, cases like this are just a tragedy, and we are applying, I think we're trying to make clear to you, we're trying to apply every possible tool, including some legal issues. Now, the truth is we've made clear to Japanese colleagues and friends that we're going to look carefully at all avenues, and that they need to understand the urgency, and that outrage is growing on Capitol Hill, indignation not just among the parents, but a much broader group of the American people and the electorate and in the executive branch. And they have a chance to do this under the right conditions, right? In the spirit of partnership, of the humanity, of a strong bilateral relationship. But ultimately, I come down where Congressman Frank indicates, that in a case where the clear-cut needs of American families come to play, then we're going to have to take a very hard look. And I must say, I am not ashamed about the steps that we have taken in support of the Japanese abductees. But I think our parents have a right to say, look, let's expect the same thing in return. And we make that point in almost all of our meetings. Very different circumstances, obviously, but we want the same compassion and commitment from Japanese colleagues.
I'll just conclude with this and throw it out to you one more time on the bilateral agreement as to whether or not you would consider establishing a special court that would adjudicate these cases. I mean, this is a festering sore that will only grow, and I hope the Japanese government understands it. I mean, we are close friends and allies, but this is a human rights abuse against American children and American left-behind parents. I will continue to push hard for the H.R. 1940, and it's a matter of when and not if that I believe we will get that enacted. And I say that because there needs to be a penalty phase. Friends don't let friends commit human rights abuses, well, whether it be human trafficking, religious freedom, or any other abuse. This is, you know, as the Hague Convention and its genesis shows clearly, parental abduction is child abuse. It hurts the child more than anyone else, injures the left-behind parents, but it hurts the child. And I know you know that, and I know you know that well. But I do believe there needs to be a penalty phase at some point for a country, ally or not, that continues its obstinacy with regards to this. So I would ask you to I'm not sure who has made the decision to accept no as no, but if the Secretary of State, if President Obama, if you, who deal with this issue every day, could work it to try to turn that no to a yes for a bilateral agreement. Otherwise, I have a sense of fright, and I talked, like you, to the left-behind parents. They sense that when that door closes, it will not create an atmosphere that will resolve the older cases. They will be grandfathered in as older cases, cold cases that don't get resolved. There may be an exception somewhere, but I think human nature being what it is, time and delay is denial. Those children will grow. They will be, you know, they will be 21, 30, who knows what it will be. They'll get to see mom or dad then, but these are these years that are irreplaceable. So I ask you, please, push for that bilateral agreement, special court, call it whatever you want, or whatever modality you choose, but there needs to be a process and an agreement between our two countries. And otherwise, there needs to be a penalty phase, and because they're getting away with abduction. So if you want to respond to that, or...
I don't think the door is ever closed to trying to reach an agreement on this. I think there are a number of ways that we can try to do it. One of them is in changes in Japanese domestic law that they will need to make anyhow in order to ratify the convention, and we can encourage them to include the older cases in this ratification.
But again, I would hope that President Obama would talk to the Prime Minister and say, solving these cases, and it will take, I think, a mechanism. It won't happen just by saying a wave of the arm or the wand. So make that, you know, his major talking point in his next meeting.
Let me just say we've had great success in Secretary Clinton has made this a major issue in her various meetings with the Japanese foreign minister, and we do agree that this has to be an issue that is raised at the highest level in our government. It is also the case, frankly, that we underscore to Japan what a success story looks like. And the most recent one was really in the Clinton administration. We had a huge problem with Germany. Lots of pressure. President Clinton worked with the German government. We now have a much, much better situation. And I will underscore that many of those pre-existing cases were dealt with. And so we understand, I don't know how else to say this, Congressman, that it's not enough just to work on going forward. It has to be, it has to involve the existing. When you say pre-existing cases, it sounds so antiseptic. The ongoing crisis and the enormous challenge that these families are facing right now. And we expect that those issues will be dealt with. I don't know how else to say it. Right. And frankly, every single possible thing we're doing right now, we are doing, at least at my lowly level, I am doing.
And as you know so well, every day of continued unlawful retention is another day of abuse. Mr. Payne.
Just a quick closing comment. We've heard, and you talked about the great success, the breakthrough finally in Germany. We're at loggerheads here in Japan, so evidently the countries where we have the largest number of these cases are countries where we've had military installations and marriages between U.S. GIs and the current population. Since we are having a 10-year war in Iraq and in no less than that in Afghanistan, I just wonder whether is the nature of these rotations and wars and the manner in which the war is conducted today different, and therefore we don't necessarily have to anticipate that 2 or 3 years from now we're going to see 2 additional countries where we're starting to come up with a lot of clashes and loggerheads. How is the current conflicts we find ourselves in your opinion, leading to the situation, or whether because of the difference in the manner in which war is waged, we may not have the same problem?
Yeah. First of all, just 2 things, Congressman Payne. In truth, most of the abductions are to Canada and Mexico, just as a starting point. And secondly, the nature of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan are such that there is not the kind of off-time fraternization, mingling that we see in circumstances where you're at peace but living, in another country and out on the economy. So I don't anticipate this problem in many places for a variety of reasons in the Middle East. Okay.
Thank you. I want to thank our distinguished witnesses, Dr. Campbell and Ambassador Jacobs, for your testimony. Look forward to working with you going forward. I do ask unanimous consent that members of the subcommittee have 5 days to revise the extended remarks and submit, and we will submit some additional questions. Mr. Payne might have some additional ones as well on a number of other countries that we have concerns about. So I thank you, and this hearing is adjourned.